Story 1. I used to work in a grocery store, a small store, so we didn't have a specific job we did like cashier, but all of us did what was needed, and we felt like that day. If you didn't feel like you wanted to deal with customers, you could just do inventory or stock shelves. Nice job. First, I noticed something weird when I was doing the evening shift before closing. My coworker was with me. It was a slow evening, and he was taking a break downstairs. So I was checking best before dates from products near the cash register and in front of the doors. I was completely alone, and suddenly I heard the heavy metal door shut close that led to the break room. I just thought, well, my coworker's coming back up. Nothing unusual. Didn't even bother to turn around. My coworker runs to me and asks if I went downstairs a minute ago. I said no, I've been here the whole time, and the only one here. He asks whether I am sure. I say I am completely sure, and see him freaking out a bit, and he is not a man who freaks out easily. For example, we had a theft, and he ran after the thief until he gave him back what he stole. So he starts checking the whole store, which is really not big, and no one is found. Okay, we still call our boss in case it is a robbery or something, and he comes by. We watch the security tape and see the heavy metal door slightly opening and closing, but no one going. After this incident, my coworker says he heard footsteps after closing, but never found anyone. So another evening shift. I'm the cashier again and working with my other coworker. He is checking the freezer in the back, so I'm alone in the store. This old lady comes in and I greet her from the cash register. She doesn't answer, whatever. People often don't. I'm bored, so I decide to follow her through the security monitor. She just walks around and goes to a blind spot, so I don't see her through cameras, but she never comes out. I'm waiting, thinking WTF, pretty sure this place is haunted by now. I go to that aisle and there's no one there. My coworker comes to let me go home and asks if the store is empty. I tell him what happened, and he just shrugs, saying he has seen the old lady and doesn't get it either. Story 2. I think I might be going through mine right now. We live in a 100-year-old plus building in NYC. There is a surprisingly large pool of rent-controlled tenants, all of whom, for those familiar with the city, are pretty typical Upper West Siders, old, crazy, talk too close to your face types. As these people pass, the management company is gut renovating the units and charging market rate, which is easily 6-7x the previously charged rate. I bring this up only to show that there is a very diverse economic personality population in the building. The person inhabiting our unit prior to us was an older man named John, who had lived here since his early years in the 1940s. I had a chance to see the unit before it was renovated, and it was bizarre, to say the least. It obviously hadn't been touched since the 50s and was very poorly maintained. The man had 5 different rooms, all of which he had painted a solid color, including the floor. The dining area was floor-to-ceiling fire truck red. The living room was black, and the bedrooms were Pantone yellow. Floor to ceiling. According to our neighbors, who are also recent additions to the building, he would blast opera music at 2 a.m. He was in his 90s, and his boyfriend was in his 30s, and they were always screaming at each other. And they lived in complete filth. He was well known on our block, mostly because he had lived here his whole life. So that's a lot of background, but I feel like it gives me a reason why what's happening is happening. After the dust settled from our move into the newly redone apartment, my husband was working late and I was at home on the couch. It is positioned in such a way that when sitting on one end, the guest bedroom door is just cut off from your line of sight. I'm with my dog doing a Sudoku when I hear the gentle click of the door closing. My dog's head perks up and he gives a low growl. He's a schnauzer, so this isn't uncommon for him. He hears any kind of unexpected noise. I get up and see the guest room door has shut. I go in, all the windows are closed in the apt. But it's an old-ass building, so I don't think anything of it. I open the door and go back to my puzzle. A few minutes later, the door closes again, but with a bit more intention. The sound spooks me, but only that I wasn't expecting it. I'm genuinely just thinking it's structural. I open the door again and decide to watch it for a bit and see if I can see where the fault is. It stays perfectly still for about 3 to 4 minutes. I turn around to go back to the couch and I shit you. Not that door immediately slams behind me. Now, I am scared. I whip around to open the door and it is locked. The handle won't budge. It's worth repeating that all these fixtures are brand new, which kind of feeds the argument of malfunctions, but also that it shouldn't. My brain couldn't decide. What happened next is harder to explain with just words. When I have told this part of the story to other people, I'm able to demonstrate. But I put my ear against the door. It's a cheaper, modern single-panel door, so it looks nice but doesn't feel hardy. And I immediately hear something knock on the other side, as if it were a quick tap with the backside of the hand using their knuckle. I could hear the position of the hand, if that makes sense, and the door gave a gentle vibration. This is when I straight up freaked, grabbed my dog, decided it was time for his evening walk, and called a friend who wouldn't think I was insane. I got back and closed myself in the bedroom. These kinds of events continue. My parents come to stay with us 1 week, and we wake up the next morning and my mom says to me at breakfast, "You know you have a ghost, right?" I had not mentioned our experiences to others because literally anyone who stayed with us would be in this spooky room, and I didn't want them to be on edge. I go totally numb when she says this. I ask her why she thinks that, and her response was, "I saw him. He was sitting in your desk chair. I don't think it's a mean ghost, though. He seemed very old." I couldn't engage in the conversation further. Story 3. My grandfather had been in WW2 and told us about when he and a few other soldiers had been separated from his unit and were trying to get to Normandy. They had gone through a clearing in a wooded area, but had to drop when they heard something approaching. They were on their bellies in low grass when they saw 20 or 30 German soldiers running across the clearing, clearly in a state of panic. Then they just froze in mid-step. He said they resembled statues, that some weren't even touching the ground, and that there was no noise whatsoever. Even the birds had gone silent. After a few seconds came a loud noise like metal scraping on concrete, and the frozen soldiers started to become blurry to the point at which they vanished without a trace. This had been reported by all of the soldiers that were present, and all were called to the War Office in London after their return to the UK. There, they were pressed on what they saw over the period of a few days, and we were taken back to the same spot in France shortly after the war had ended. Surprisingly, when they got there were other men sharing the same accommodation who reported similar occurrences in the exact same area. They were all taken to the woods and had to describe where and how the events took place. My granddad had said that the entire area was guarded heavily and that part of the ground was heavily excavated. The strangest thing of all the other, he said, was that there were hundreds of dogs in the area, just milling around for no apparent reason. They returned to the UK with a gag order, ordering them never to speak about any of this. He went back to the same spot in France before he died in 1985 and said that the area had been covered with unmarked warehouses and was guarded by an unusually professional security company. He reckoned they were military. I've tried to find out more about this, but can't find any records of it. But I do remember one of the guys who he was with the day. He used to come and visit sometimes and referred to the place as the Splintered Woods. Story 4. Me and 2 friends go down and rent a boat on Lake Okeechobee in Florida. We get a 30-foot pontoon boat that has a cover, although there's no cabin or anything under the main deck. It's winter in South Florida, so it's cool but not cold. Thus, we decided to just sleep on the boat instead of setting up a camp. We plan on spending 3 days and 2 nights on the lake. We spend our time drinking, fishing, and playing games. It's sometime on the second night when I just wake up. I'm still drunk from our previous activities, but my senses are on overdrive, and I just feel aware of something. I was sleeping towards the back of the boat while my friends were at the front. It's eerily calm with no waves in the water. We were about 250 feet from shore with land on our port side. I started scanning the tree line looking for something. Nothing on land, so I scanned the water on the port side. Nothing. So I scanned the water aft of the boat. Nothing. I didn't want to disturb my friends up front, so I scanned the water on the starboard side. That's when I saw it. A skull floating in the water with just the eye sockets and part of the nasal cavity sitting there in the water, looking right at me about 50 feet away. An immediate sense of dread took me. It was the most scared I'd ever been in my life. Then an even worse feeling took over, calmness and the sudden urge to jump in the water. I had the notion that I would be at home and at peace if I just jumped into the water. Before I could act on it, I think one of my friends stirred in their sleep because I heard a beer bottle start rolling near the front of the boat. This snapped me out of it, and the feeling of dread returned. I yelled at them to get up while I moved to start the engines. One doesn't respond at all, while the other drunkenly tells me to fuck off. I yell again that I'm not fucking around and nothing. I'm about to pull the starter on the engine, yell again at my friends when I hear something. I freeze and listen closely. A very faint splashing sound that is slowly getting closer. I forget about yelling at my friends and focus on starting the engine. I pull and pull and pull on the start and nothing. In between the pulls, I hear the splashing getting closer, but I don't dare look at the direction of the noise. Finally, the engine starts and I punch it out of there. I must have gone 30 miles before I came to a stop to conserve fuel. Until the sun rose and my friends woke up, I spent the rest of the night scanning the waters just in case. I had to make up a bullshit excuse to explain to my friends why we were so far away from our previous spot. I wanted to tell them, but I doubt they would believe me. When I got home, I did some research, and apparently Native American tribes, possibly, used the lake as a burial ground. Plus, there are thought to be the bodies of many victims of hurricanes throughout the decades lying in the lake. Fishermen have found many human bones over the years. This was over 6 years ago, and I have yet to set foot near any body of water larger than my shower. No lakes, oceans, rivers, water parks, pools, hot tubs, nothing. I don't blame you if you don't believe some random guy on the internet. Many times, I tried to write it off as my drunk self seeing things. However, I can't write off the feeling of wanting to jump into the water with something, real or not, that struck me with terror just a moment ago. Thinking about that feeling of wanting to go into the water with whatever was out there chills me to this day. Story 5. My friend, we'll call her Patty, had a son who passed away from a drug overdose at 16 years old. He had a dog, a husky, that he loved and who loved him dearly. Years later, the husky was getting old, and Patty thought about having her put down, but couldn't bring herself to do so, as she felt the dog was all she had left of her son. One night, as Patty was sleeping, she had a dream. She was sitting on the beach, where she used to take her when he was a little boy. It was one of their favorite places. The husky was sitting next to her on the beach, and they both sat, peacefully watching seagulls. This dog was the most obedient, and even if it had wanted very badly to chase the seagulls or beg for a pat from a passing stranger, it wouldn't have left its owner's side. This is why Patty was surprised when she heard someone whistle, and the dog immediately stood up and behind, wagging its tail. She and the dog shared a look, as if the dog were asking her permission. Patty looked down the beach for the owner of the offending whistle, and that's when she saw him. Her son was standing on the beach, just far enough away that she could barely make out his features. He waved at her. Something told her that she must not get up and try to approach him, that his presence was fleeting, and that if she so much as moved too fast, he would be gone. She waved back. She looked back at the dog, who was still staring at her with her ear cocked to the side, waiting for permission to go to her boy. Patty reached out and rubbed the top of the dog's head one more time and said, "Of course, go on now." The husky immediately rushed down the beach to the boy and greeted him with excitement. The boy and the dog walked away down the beach together, never looking back, and Patty watched until they disappeared against the horizon. When Patty woke up the next morning, the husky, who always slept at the end of her bed, had passed away during the night. Patty wasn't sad. She felt that the boy had left his husky with her to comfort her through the years, until she didn't need comfort anymore, and that he had returned to reunite with his dog. Patty felt peaceful because she knew they were together. Patty and I worked together 15 years ago, and I think about this story at least once a year. Story 6. 2 years ago in the summer, I worked in an open-air mining museum as a tourist guide. Around 80% of the tour is situated underground in an actual 500 years old mine shaft. During my first days, my boss was showing me around the mine, talking about some interesting facts and history so I could remember it and pass it on to the visitors. He had also lectured me about safety precautions. The underground part is around 1.5 kilometers long, and the deepest you go is until you reach the second horizon, a term used as a floor in a mine, which is around 100 meter. The whole place is much bigger though. There's 14 horizons in total, and the tunnels connect to the surrounding mines in the area. So in reality, there are hundreds of kilometers of tunnels down there, but they are mostly flooded or buried under rocks. There are 3 telephones underground, each around 500 meters away from another, and they can be used to contact the cashier outside on the surface or other guides that are nearby with their own group. On our way to the third phone, my boss was explaining how I could use it to contact another guide in case anyone got sick or just wanted to get out of the mine. Kids often get scared, people with claustrophobia, etc. We were passing one of the exhibits, which was an old chest used for storing mining tools, and we walked down the stairs right after. We soon reached the third phone when my boss told me that we would now test it by calling each other. He asked me to walk to the first phone located all the way back at the entrance of the mine and call him. On my way back, I was walking up the same stairs, and about halfway up, I noticed something very strange. The chest was definitely closed when we walked past it like 2 minutes ago, but now it was open. My first thought was that the chest was open all this time, and I just hadn't noticed. Or that the other guides were pulling a prank on the new guy. However, as I was walking towards the chest, it slammed itself shut, right in front of me, and made a loud noise. I got so scared, I ran to the entrance and called my boss on the third phone. I asked him if the chest had been opened before, but he said it's just an exhibit and it had always been closed because there's nothing in it anyway. I explained what happened, and he tried to make a joke out of it, but he also sounded a bit nervous. Later, when I told this to my colleagues, one of them said that a similar thing had happened to her before, but she only heard loud bangs, as when someone was slamming doors when she was closing the entrance at the end of the day. Story 7. I was 15 years old in my home country. I was alone in my house, watching television in one of the bedrooms of the house and cooking some food in the kitchen. My house was quite small and had an open plan, so you could basically see the front door and the doors to all the other rooms from the kitchen. All the doors and windows were wide open, as it was a pretty warm night. I got up to check the food during the commercial break when, while stirring the pan, I lifted my head and saw a man walking ever so slowly and quietly from the room I was watching the TV through the front door out to the garden. The man was tall, blonde, slim, and was dressed in white, very much like a nurse or doctor would be dressed. And he looked just like any flesh human being. Nothing see-through or unusual about him other than he didn't bloody belong there. He made no sounds whatsoever and didn't look at me or anything. He simply walked the 4 meters through these 2 doors, which were right opposite to each other. I was a bit baffled, but strangely, not scared at all. Rather, I was filled with this sense of peace. Very weird. Anyhow, I finished cooking my dinner and went back to the bedroom where I continued watching my program, when, all of a sudden, I heard heavy steps, like running, outside the window of said room. This window was big, almost half of the wall, and looked out to an outdoor corridor that led to the backyard. I got up to investigate, and of course, I didn't dare walk into the dark corridor. Instead, I found my very protective German Shepherd dog sitting at the top of it and staring into the corridor from where the step sound came. Now, this dog would always bark at strangers, so again, I was baffled. Nothing of the sort ever happened to me again. A couple of years ago, and about 12 years after this experience, I was having a chat with my dad over the phone. I now live on the other side of the world, and for whatever reason, he started talking about this insane asylum around the corner from the house where this happened. The massive garden of this asylum was right next to my backyard, separated by a tall wall. My dad said that in the 80s, one of the residents at this asylum started stabbing the nurses and actually killed one of them. I couldn't find anything about this on the internet, but I guess it explains the sighting. I still have no idea what the ghost was doing in my house. Story 8. This happened about a year ago. My then 3-year-old daughter would tell me about a ghost boy. Her 7-year-old brother always fell asleep first, and she told me that a little boy would appear most nights and gently scratch his back when my son would fall asleep. One day, she was telling me that the ghost boy was mean to her when she told him to get away from her brother. My daughter is a very spoiled little sister, and my big brother deals with her very lovingly. I joked and told my daughter maybe this ghost boy was mean to her because she was mean to her brother. Fast forward about 3 months later, and we haven't heard about Ghost Boy in a while. I was woken up one night, and in the dark, I could make out the shape of my son standing at the end of the bed on the left side near me. I called out his name, and he took off running. Little weird, but hey, at least my bed space was still mine for the moment. I turned over to my right and was surprised to feel a warm little lump at the foot of my bed. I investigated the lump to determine which child it was, so I could return them to their bed. It was my son. Although it was dark, I was certain the figure that had just run away was a boy. This figure was the same size as my son, and not smaller like my daughter. I carried my son back to his room and found my daughter fast asleep in her bed, still tucked in warmly underneath her blankets. I ran back to my room and hid under my covers, unable to return to sleep. The next morning, I asked my daughter if she remembered her ghost boy. According to my daughter, the ghost boy was still making nightly visits, but she was now afraid of him and hid under her covers during his presence each night. When we returned home that evening, we prayed in my kids' room and haven't heard another peep since.
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.